Thank you, Bishop Seitz. I'm very grateful. I will call up the response panel. Kevin Appleby will make the introductions for that. Mea culpa, one little omission that I made, but important. I said the day ended at 4:30. Well, that's just the sort of the first part of the ending of the day at 4:30. So please cancel those tickets that you were sort of busily putting. Take a look at your packet. There is a really wonderful installation that folks have been working on that will be presented in the President's Dining Room videos starting at 12:30, running through 4:45, and then at 4:45 there'll be a presentation and roundtable, performing empathy, narrative spaces, and testimonies of everyday life among immigrant women in New York City. So please note that. So you're not free to go at 4:30, and I'm sure you can deal with that. But thank you, Kevin.
My name's Kevin Appleby. I'm Senior Fellow at the Center for Migration Studies, and I'm based in Washington, but come up to New York periodically, of course, to the main office. And it's amazing to me how I came in on the bus, and I look at the skyline, I'm like, this skyline changes every time I come here. What's the deal with those skinny buildings that go way up to the sky? I would never get in one of those. I'm scared of heights, but my point is that New York, it's apt that we're in New York, because New York is a city that reinvents itself, that is able to adjust, that changes and grows, but all at the same time keeps its identity. And that's what's amazing about this city. So I'm glad to be here and to be with you. And it's sort of a theme of what Bishop Seitz hit in his speech, that we have to think about rebuilding, recreating during this conference. What is the third way to go? How can we prepare for the future so that we see a future where things might improve and become better? And I think that'll be the tone of our response panel today. And we have a lot of very talented and accomplished speakers to respond both to Bishop Seitz, but also talk a little bit about what we're facing in the current moment. What are some of the current challenges, and how does Catholic social teaching speak to that? So I'm going to introduce the speakers as they get up and speak, and then we'll hopefully have time for questions and answers at the end. So our first speaker is Professor Leo Guardado, who is the Associate Professor in the Department of Theology here at Fordham. He has worked with churches, dioceses, and interfaith groups to develop humanitarian and pastoral responses to persons on the move. Professor will speak to some of the current reality of immigration enforcement actions in the U.S. and some of the moral and ethical questions they may pose and how we may be able to respond. Welcome, Professor.
Thank you. Well, good morning. Thank you, Kevin, for the introduction. My name is Leo. I'm in the theology department here, as was said. And thank you, Bishop Seitz. I don't know where you went, but there you are. Thank you for your prophetic remarks, for your analysis of the current situation, illuminated by the light of the gospel, and really your profound call to action. In my brief time of about 10 minutes, let me talk theology. Because responding to the historical density and evil of mass deportations, the possible destruction of human lives on a mass scale, as we've known from other decisive moments of history, requires that we enter more fully into God talk. Bishop, you echoed Pope Francis's 2019 message for the World Day of Migrants and Refugees, where he reminds us that it's not just about migrants. In that brief document, Francis goes on to say that it is also about our fears, our racist fears, and it is also about our humanity. It is about putting the last in the first place. In a word, it is not only the cause of migrants that is at stake. It is not just about them, but about all of us, and about the present and the future of the human family. Pope Francis worked tirelessly to break down an us versus them mentality, the kind that leads to the killing of one sibling by another, as we know from the story of Cain and Abel in the book of Genesis. Such fratricide was the core message of Francis's homily in Lampedusa in 2013, and it continued to be the central concern of his papacy until the end. In the letter he sent to the US bishops on February 10th of this year, where he spoke of mass deportations, he said, "I exhort all the faithful of the Catholic Church and all men and women of goodwill not to give into narratives that discriminate against and cause unnecessary suffering to our migrant and refugee brothers and sisters. With charity and clarity, we are all called to live in solidarity and fraternity, to build bridges that bring us ever closer together, to avoid walls of ignominy, and to learn to give our lives as Jesus Christ gave his for the salvation of all." The theological and ethical core of Francis's papacy was to move us from fratricide to fraternity, from killing each other with ever greater precision and indifference, to forging bonds of humanity and friendship that redefine and eradicate the conceptual and material borders that strategically keep us strangers to each other. As he says in the 2021 message for the World Day of Migrants and Refugees, there is only a we, a nosotros. We are the others. In truth, there are no others. And the very Catholicity of the Church, its universal mission, means that the flourishing of all life and all creation is its reason for being church. Francis was not only or primarily dealing with ethics in his pronouncements on migration, on the poor, on the environment, the marginalized, or the excluded, though there certainly was an ethics. Francis was redefining theology, expanding and deepening the constitutive social and historical dimension of all theology. There's a saying that, quote, "There is nothing more practical than a good theory." And I want to emphasize that whatever response we, the church, laity, and prelates, can provide in this historical moment of mass deportations requires that we continue to engage in a difficult process of thinking and praying amid our daily struggles, and that we not separate thought and action. In 2015, Francis wrote, "Not infrequently, a kind of opposition is constructed between theology and pastoral work, as though they were two opposing separate realities, which have nothing to do with one another. Our belief in the incarnation, that God became and continues to become human, leads us to overcome the division of the pastoral and the academic. And this is really a call out for all of us who work in the craft of theology. For the deepest theological questions are at heart pastoral questions, questions that arise from the everyday agonizing reality of what it means to follow Jesus, even unto a cross. Of what it means to love God and neighbor, not as two separate realities, but as one. There is no Christian love of God apart from the love of our sisters and brothers, especially those facing death in its multiple forms. I'll echo Bishop Seitz' words today. Quote, "We do well right now to free ourselves from claimants to Christianity or from notions of Christianity that fall short of the fundamental teaching of Christ," close quote. But of course, for each one of us here who claims to be Christian, our own identity, who we say we are, must cohere with what we do. There's a saying that if you want to know what someone believes, watch what they do. So what ought we to do to be a credible, one worth believing in, Catholic community in this country? This is the ethics part that I will still not directly address in these 10 minutes, because we still need to go deeper into theological roots. Toward the end of his remarks, Bishop Seitz said that we need to work synodally. So synodality is not simply a way of acting, but a way of being church. And I want to emphasize two key realities that are relevant for our context of mass deportations. And these are processes and time. In Evangelii Gaudium, Francis's 2013 encyclical on the joy of the gospel, he famously said that time is greater than space. And he added, giving priority to time means being concerned about initiating processes rather than possessing spaces. Time governs spaces, illumines them, and makes them links in a constantly expanding chain with no possibility of return. What we need then is to give priority to actions which generate new processes in society and engage other persons and groups who can develop them to the point where they bear fruit in significant historical events. Now, in the urgency of the moment, when thousands of people are being hunted down, caged, forcibly separated from their families, and disappeared, Francis's words may seem completely out of touch with this time and this space of human suffering. But I believe that it is exactly in these urgent times that we must prayerfully think and act with a keen awareness that what we do now is inseparable from the long horizon open before us, that our actions open or foreclose creative processes and possibilities capable of transforming the institutionalized violence of our history. The future is not separate from the present. We do not live in a dualistic world, even if we too often tend to act this way. Whatever we do or fail to do, to echo confession language, together, across differences, in this historical moment, is already unleashing processes that respond to or justify mass human atrocities. There is nothing that guarantees that in the long span of history, we, the church, laity or bishops of this generation, will be on the side of the good, the holy, the human, unless we as church stay close to those whom the state and its legalized violence seek to disappear through incarceration and deportation. This past Friday at a panel at Georgetown University focused on deportation, Bishop Evelio Menjivar shared that migrant communities in the US are using the same phrase that he would hear in El Salvador during the 1980s Civil War. Se lo llevaron. They took him, or they took her. He said, when people were kidnapped, when people were taken by death squads, when they would disappear by the guerrilla, people used to say, se lo llevaron. He added, this is the level of terror that people are feeling these days. He grew up in El Salvador during the war, as did I. We all experience time differently. And for millions of people in this country, this is already a time of war. And so let us not forget Archbishop Oscar Romero, Saint Oscar Romero, and the countless catechists, faith leaders, teachers, and people of faith and goodwill from all traditions who were deemed a threat to national security and were eliminated in one way or another because they stayed close to the persecuted poor. They are signposts for the road that we may be called to walk together in the following of Jesus. This is the ethics of the cross. So to finish, how can the Catholic community respond? Since 2017, Pope Francis emphasized 4 key verbs in his teaching on migration, which he said needed to be conjugated, needed to be infleshed, brought to life in the particularity of every community. The four verbs are welcome, protect, promote, integrate. Simple until you start to put them in practice. In the spirit of synodality, each parish, each Catholic university, each local church is asked to do an examination of conscience in the spirit and ask, how do we welcome migrants, refugees, asylum seekers, unauthorized persons in this country? How do we protect them? How do we promote them? How do we integrate them? Or do we? Our enfleshed responses will communicate in whom or in what we place our faith. I leave you with Pope Leo's words. In a world darkened by war and injustice, even when all seems lost, migrants and refugees stand as messengers of hope. Let us not discredit the hope they bear. Let us not say that we would give them false hope through our actions. Their hope may be our mutual salvation. Thank you.
Our next speaker is a special speaker from here at Fordham. Her name is Layla Mayorga Gonzalez. She's a Ph.D. candidate in philosophy, specializing in political philosophy, Mexican philosophy, and pragmatism. Her research focuses on developing a phenomenology, I got it right, of citizenship and reimagining the relationship between human rights and surveillance rights. Layla, thank you for joining us.
Hello, can everybody hear me? I'm gonna time myself just to make sure. All right, thank you very much. And also thank you very much, Bishop Seitz, for your speech. Hola everyone, mi nombre es Layla Mayorga Gonzalez. I am, as mentioned, a Ph.D. candidate in philosophy here at Fordham University. And I'm going to share my actual experience growing up as previously undocumented for 24 plus years. I'm old, but that experience is crucial now because the fear that undocumented children or just being called undocumented or even just hearing the word alien is dehumanizing. So I'm gonna give you my experience ever since a child, since I figured out, like this is like the regular maybe experiences that these children are going through. So I wanted to start off in altogether come with me into my mind, to my story as a 15-year-old girl at high school. Like try to imagine yourself also in high school, you know, back in the old days. And this was the pinnacle of my life because it was at age 15, I found out I had no papers. Age 15, I'm still a child. All I wanted to do is just like be the cool girl, you know, back in the day, just pass class. So how it all started, actually, it was when I was in a college preparation course back in Houston, Texas. And it aimed, this college preparation course, you know, is where like, oh, apply for FAFSA, all this stuff, or TASFA back in Texas. It was when the whole class had to get to the section where fill in your social security number. Everybody knew what security number was except me. And I was just there sitting and I was like, huh, how does everybody know this but me? Then is when I asked my counselor, or the college prep coordinator, who was also Latina. She actually scolded me for not knowing my social security and made me call my parents, but my parents didn't answer during that time. The day ended, and that is when I went home and asked my parents. I said, Mom, what's a social? And that is when it all hit. This is the existentialism of a child happening at this moment. My mom told me, Mija, sweetie, you don't have one because you're Mexican. You're not from here. I repeat that sentence because that's how traumatized it was that day. And I was like back responding to her. Well, yeah, I know I'm not from here, Mom. I'm Mexican, but I'm also American. That's what I told her. That is when my mom said the following. Mija, sweetie, you have been undocumented since you were 3 years old. We didn't have the money to renew your paperwork back then. We didn't think it mattered. You're undocumented, Those dreams, college, that's not for you. That's not for us. She said specifically, that's not for our kind. That is the dehumanizing part that even my mother already had placed in herself for being Latina. That's why I want you to all understand the scope of Latinidad, the dehumanization that you internalize in yourself. It was already present and then passed down to me. I, of course, retaliated. I'm a high schooler, 15 years old. I'm a fight. I didn't know the intensity of just this digit number, this little card, this little paper call, social security number, uttered me from everyone else in my school. It destroyed me. All my dreams and goals all shattered in that day, and I had to keep silent. No lo hables, no lo digas. Don't say it, keep shut. That's the undocumented life at age 15, all because of a digit number. Eventually, because of the scope of time, I have to explain my life situation. I was able to apply for Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, also known as DACA. Just for context, for those who don't know much about DACA, DACA gives undocumented immigrants who came to the United States as children temporary protection from deportation, plus permission to work, and it has to be renewed every 2 years. Usually I had to pay $495 every 2 years. They say 2 years, but it's technically 1 month and 1 year and 8 months, continuously. Every single time, I always had to make sure, ever since I was young, 15, to have $600 every year to make sure I can pay for it. Yes, I had to work as a child, just so I can have papers. The problem is that I want you all to take about DACA is that DACA isn't permanent. It still isn't. And that is why it's important to talk about it. It was this policy I became what is known as a dreamer, and I was able to graduate my bachelor's in 3 years, my master's in 1 year, and my second master's in 2. All still undocumented, thanks to this policy. This policy actually allowed me to kind of become what a lot of philosophers call me, a quasi-citizen. My experience of having to be in the shadows to hide who I am because of a digital number separates my humanness from you and I. That little card, that code. This is why I also pursued philosophy, and I continue to push this idea of like, what does it mean to be a dreamer? Because I don't think dreamers is just for undocumented, it's for everybody. This is what I take from Bishop Seitz, that in finding new ways together is critical. One of the components I claim here that is essential from what I've learned from my whole philosophical journey is what I call, and what has been taught to me by other pastors, is called open border heart. That is, by open border heart, is that categories, labels that are all given to us ever since we are children do not actually determine our whole existence. Realizing that in our world, we travel in and out, all these categories that label us and we internalize, is because we have opened our heart towards it. Realizing that our human self, you as a person, I as a human sitting here, are real and have all these categories and labels still in the back of our heads, or as people in Latino studies called, this bridge called my back. It is all hanging. And you try to every day not think about them. Realizing the concepts like citizenship, legal, illegal, are what divide us and place us in a hierarchical system, not just in the human world of human recognition, but even places a hierarchical system under God. I remember when reading a book in my undergrad, because I used to study a lot of philosophy of religion. It is this book called, quote, Our God is Undocumented, end quote, by pastors Matthew Cowell and Chet Myers. I've learned from these both pastors. Both of them actually taught me that in the kingdom of God, there's no passport or legal concepts. Rather, we're all humans under the kingdom of God, and one and the same. That these concepts, everything that we have placed ourselves, what's on our backs and our bridges, under God, who's also undocumented, he has no borders. There's no borders for salvation. What they taught me is that salvation requires open borders, both spiritual and physical. In addition to this, I wanted to add here, as my time at Fordham University as a professor and teaching fellow, one of the main philosophers I have to teach is Immanuel Kant, who was a German idealist. And he even advocated for a conception known as hospitality that was mentioned previously. By hospitality, he means welcoming. As with his idea of the categorical imperative, or some people consider it the golden mean, we ought to welcome one another in a way that we recognize our shared humanity, that is, regardless of the legal status. It is precarious to understand that DACA, TPS, unauthorized, irregular, whatever category you want to place these human beings to separate us from our humanity, despite having to prove, quote, what under the Immigration Nationality Act has good moral character, does not confer to this legal status permanently. Good moral character is crucial, especially in determining what it actually means. Because even I, as I teach my students, and I still do my research, what does good moral character mean? This is where I want to shift to what is the way to help undocumented students like my previous self? And what would I would like to hear from other people who have assisted me back then when I had no one other than myself? One is that providing scholarships that don't require Social Security is the start. That already separates our humanity and our categories to start off with. The second part, which is a sad one, and I hate to mention it, but this is the reality we live in, making sure that these children and students have copies of their DACA, work permit, social card, ID, proof of residence at all times, and at least have it shared with 3 people in case they take them. Because the dream DACA is still a policy, it's not permanent. It also, I claim, it goes for supporting policies like the DREAM Act. That is, that we have been advocating since 2001. I'm gonna repeat again, since 2001, to try to pass for children who were brought without their consent or have no acknowledgement, like myself since 3 years old, who have been through similar pathways that United States is the only home they know. This is why I claim that it's important to understand that my categories, your categories, it is crucial to understand who you are today, especially what it means to allude, especially me growing up in Texas, what we pledge to the allegiance, like pledge allegiance of what it means to say a nation under God. Since 1954, a pledge is a devotion, a fulfillment we obtake. An allegiance here is our group, our loyalty, those who are already in the nation. DACA, TPS, anybody under the quote category alien, because even the alien is an LPR, a legal permanent resident. They are part of that nation. This means that even patriotically, what we have learned ever since is open borders. That is an American value of hospitality, that the undocumented who have lived here, who's speaking to you previously, is one under God and will forever be. Understanding that is a critical matter that can just start the shift of trying to achieve a flourishing life for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Layla, for sharing your story with us today. Our next speaker brings a unique perspective to our conference. He is Father Brian Strassburger, SJ, who currently serves as Director of Del Camino Jesuit Border Ministries, a new project started in 2021 and is based in Brownsville, Texas. Father Brian is also the co-host of the Jesuit Border podcast, which shares stories of the border. Maybe you can share how we can tune in sometime. Thank you, Father, and welcome.
Great, thank you for the introduction. Thank you, Bishop Seitz, for your opening remarks. Thank you to my fellow panelists for all that they're sharing. What I'd like to share is from my perspective just about what's going on the border, just to bring that reality to light here. So what is happening on the border? Well, as we know, it is closed right now to asylum seekers, completely closed. If you don't have a US passport or visa, you cannot get into the country. Poor, sick, seeking relief, not welcome. And that's not to say that there was an open border before then, but the one pathway for legal entry left open by the Biden administration, which was the scheduled appointments with a smartphone app called CBP-1, that many of you are familiar with, was canceled and closed on January 20th, effectively saying there's no way to come to our country and seek asylum. So when that happened on January 20th, as the president was inaugurated, there were hundreds of people in shelters in northern Mexico who had confirmed appointments that were then permanently canceled. That includes people like Edwin and his wife and son who had fled Colombia because a gang was pressuring his son to join. They got an appointment actually for January 15th, 5 days before the inauguration. Came up to the border, and when they arrived in Reynosa, Mexico, they were kidnapped. They paid for their ransom to get released. This was very common. More than half the migrants I was meeting back in these days were getting kidnapped as they came to the border by the local cartel. Okay. They paid for their ransom and were released 3 days later, January 18th. They were in Reynosa. They found a Catholic church there. Our partners brought them to Matamoros because their appointment was for the port of entry in Brownsville. Now, they'd missed their appointment, but we took them to the bridge on the 19th, the day before the inauguration. Now, for all these months beforehand, we had been helping people who had missed appointments because they'd been kidnapped to still be able to present to the Border Patrol and be admitted into the country like they had entered at the time of their appointment. But it was January 19th. And so it was a very busy time, stressful time for Border Patrol. They said, I'm sorry, Edwin, your wife and kid, you can't come in today. We're just over capacity. We don't have capacity to help you today. Maybe come back tomorrow. Tomorrow was January 20th when the announcement went out to Edwin and so many others that your appointment has been permanently canceled. And so it's September now, and Edwin and them are still at a shelter in Matamoros trying to figure out what to do. What's happening on the border? Well, the U.S. side, I have to say, extremely quiet, never been quieter since there's no legal form of entry. There's not an invasion. I don't know, some politicians have been claiming that, but it's very quiet. Shelters on the U.S. side have turned off their lights and fired their staffs because they're just staging areas for people as they travel onward to their destinations in the country. Now, completely empty. On the Mexican side of the border, it's thinning out because there's no possibility for legal entry. So it's not like people are coming up to the border right now. It's hard to get through Mexico. I could go into that. That's a whole nother conversation. But just to say, the border population, Mexican shelters, is thinning. It's the lowest population I've ever seen. And a place that I visited in Reynosa that would usually have several hundred up to 1,000 people has 6 people as of yesterday. A Catholic shelter in Reynosa that usually has a capacity of about 150 to 200 has about a dozen people living in it now. A shelter that normally had 400 to 800 has about 50. I would say the highest population is around 50 to 80 among the 6 shelters that I visit twice a week. So what are people left to do? Those who have been in the border, those who were there on January 20th when appointments got canceled. Well, I want to talk about 4 possibilities that people have been taken. Number 1, there's no legal entry, so you might decide, I'm going to try to enter illegally, undocumented, to come into the country, evade detection by Border Patrol. Well, as soon as Trump took office, that price to pay a coyote to help you do that quadrupled. And so now people are being charged between $10,000 and $15,000. That's for a single opportunity, successful or unsuccessful. So as you can imagine, it doesn't always work. Samuel, who's from Honduras, he crossed, paid a bunch of money to do so, was caught, detained, and now is deported. Sometimes it does. Rosie, another person I know, she made it up to Houston and was reunited with her husband there. Now, of course, she's living undocumented, as we're already talking about and reflecting on, and the challenges and difficulties that brings. She got there. I found it curious to hear that she didn't have to swim across a river and like dodge Border Patrol helicopters above. She entered the United States in a car because corruption is not just present in other countries, but it happens among our Border Patrol as well. And so for the right price, you can just roll into the United States of America without documents. So that's one option, is that people are seeking non-legal entry into the United States. I know very few people who have done that, maybe less than 10, but I've heard of some people doing that. What's another option? You could return home to your home country if it's safe to do so. Karen did this. Karen's from Honduras. She's a single mom, had 2 kids, was living in a shelter. She waited, she got an appointment that then got canceled. She decided to keep waiting to see if maybe there'd be some legal case here in the United States that would open up the border to people, allow people who had those scheduled appointments to enter and seek asylum and that sort of thing. But once it got to June, she just decided, I've been waiting here for too long and I'm not seeing any change. And what she was most concerned about was, of course, her 2 kids, because they'd missed an entire school year. And so she's very concerned in the summertime to make sure she could get them back enrolled in school. I was talking to her in the kitchen of the shelter where she was helping out, and she was crying as she was talking to me about the decision. Some of her family members, and she has family in Texas, in the United States, some of those family members were counseling her to send the kids across alone They could be released and treated as unaccompanied minors and end up with a sponsor family, with her own family in the United States, and then go to school there. And she was crying to me because she said, I can't do that. I can't separate myself from my kids. And she said, does that mean I'm selfish, Father Brian, for wanting that? Does that mean I'm not a good mom? You know, Bishop Seitz talked about how families are under attack with our mass deportations. And this is just another example of it, the way our border policy separates families. Karen can't reunite with her family. She's challenged to separate from her own children to offer them a different opportunity. Now, Karen decided to keep her family together. And I wanted to acknowledge how great of a mom she was, how much she's cared about him, and how important it is for a mother to be with her children. They used a repatriation flight offered by the Mexican government and returned to her mom's house in Honduras. But not every family makes that decision. Kaylin and Hector, they were living in that same shelter, and they decided in June, just a couple of months ago, around the same time as Karen was making her decision, to send their kids across. Ashley, who's 14 years old, and Tiago, who's just 7. They were taken into the Office of Refugee Resettlement that handles unaccompanied minors as they come into the United States. Then they get processed by ORR and are released to sponsors within the US. And so Kayleen has a sister who lives in Miami. And so that was the plan, was for her. She's legal, she's documented. And so a way for her to receive these children and get them out of the ORR facility. Well, the average wait time in those facilities, we used to go there and celebrate Mass a couple times a week in some of these. The average wait time under the new administration has substantially increased. So it was around a month, around 30 to 35 days. Now already as we get to the summertime, the average wait time has grown to over 130 days. So you're talking about a kid like Tiago, separated from his parents, and now he's living in a center in the United States, being fed hot dogs every day, right? And waiting, for almost 4 months. Now, I'm happy to say that just last week, I heard from Kayleen that Ashley and Tiago had gotten released. They're with their aunt after 3 months, but now they're separated from their parents. Family separation is built into our immigration system in so many ways. So some of the options as I was going through, number 1 is you try to enter undocumented. Number 2 is you try to return home. Third option is that unlike Karen, some people can't return home, right? That's not an option for them. It's unsafe to do so. That's why they've made the journey. So what do? Many are relocating to bigger and safer cities in Mexico, like Monterrey, Mexico City, Guadalajara. It's worked well for some. Angelo is a single male from Haiti who we know from his time on the border. He went back. He definitely is not going back to Haiti. So he went to Monterrey and he's found work in construction. He's sustaining himself there, making a life. Others are having a hard time. Angie left the shelter and went down to Monterrey. She's from Venezuela. She's got 2 kids. She's still living at that shelter there because she's unable to find work. Lots of migrants stuck around Mexico are living just like an undocumented population in the United States. They don't have papers to be in Mexico either. They can't get work permits. They have to work often in the more informal sector to try to get by and face the constant threat of harassment from authorities asking for bribes not to detain and deport them in Mexico. And so that population remains extremely precarious, even as they move to safer cities. And then, of course, the last option is that they're the remaining population, the thinning population, still in shelters. The numbers are very low, but it's the most vulnerable. It's people like Ingrid, a single mom from Venezuela. She's got 2 kids. She's got family in the US, but can't get to them. Again, family separation. She can't work because her youngest son isn't school age. And so she has to be at the shelter during the day to care for him, even though she's enrolled her older daughter, into school. She can't return to Venezuela. And it's not, the situation there obviously is very complex and complicated. I don't think she's got the most airtight asylum claim, we can't say. But even if she wants to go back, she doesn't know how to do so. How do you get back to Venezuela from the US-Mexico border right now? Right? Are you going to make the whole land journey, including crossing the Darien Gap? Are you going to do that again? Even that comes with a lot of cost. It is possible to fly back to Venezuela from Mexico, but you need documents for you that are active. So you might have to go to the Venezuelan embassy in Mexico City to work that out. And then you have to pay for plane tickets for you and your 2 kids. She can't even go and work in Mexico. She's got family in the US. Is she going to rely on them for those kind of flights? You could just trying to paint the picture of why people are stuck, why people are where they are. All that being said, those are the 4 main options people are considering. All that being said, it's a very vulnerable population, and it's also incredibly resilient. And that's what inspires me and keeps me going in my work. 19 women in Reynosa just finished a 3-month course in makeup and nail care sponsored by the Mercy Sisters. They even gave a little manicure to Father Flavio, and his I don't think he quite anticipated how bright shining his fingernails would be after that. I was chatting with one of the graduates, Nicole. She told me how she feels so much better about herself now that she's learned a new skill. Like this time she spent in Mexico, over a year now, hasn't been a waste or lost time. She's signing up to do a second course. She's talking about one of her friends there of starting up a kind of a mini salon. When we show up to celebrate Mass at a shelter, which is what we principally do, we go to 6 shelters twice a week in Mexico, celebrate Mass. It's not a funeral. It's not a funeral. It's a celebration. At Casa de Migrante in Reynosa, I have to yell at the kids as they fight over who gets to be the altar server. They go run right into the place and they sit in the chair and they're like, I want to be your altar server today. I'm like, no, you can't do it. You just did it 2 days ago. We need to give it to another kid and give them a chance too, right? When we sing Alabare, our opening song, the kids are just shouting it out like they're singing, right? It's a joyful celebration of faith. If we want to build a new world beyond this one, that third world that Bishop Seitz was talking about, it should start there. It should start there with the joy and hope and that comes from our faith. After all, when I feel discouraged by what's happening all around us, and there's a lot to discourage me, I just look at the migrants I know who inspire me daily with their hope, with their trust in the Lord. You know, when the appointments were canceled on January 20th, we had a Mass in a shelter in Mexico the next day, January 20th. And after the Mass, we just opened it up for people to share, you know, how are you feeling? And people feeling, I'm terrified. I don't know what's coming next. I'm afraid. Sandra raised her hand from the back of the room and invited her to stand up and share. And she said, La esperanza es lo último que se pierde. Hope is the last thing that we lose. And I just looked at her and I thought, how can you say that when it feels like all hope is completely dashed? And it's because she doesn't put her hope in a smartphone app that allows entry to the United States. She doesn't put her hope in some president or political party. She puts her hope in the Lord. And that's a hope that doesn't disappoint. That's where I'm finding myself trying to place my hope, especially in these trying times. And that doesn't mean we sit idly by. After all, that's why we're gathered here today. We have work to do. But I just want to remind us that it's the Lord's work above all. And we are collaborators in God's grand design. Thank you.
Thank you, Father, and thank you for traveling all the way from Brownsville. That's a long way. Our final speaker is Michele Pistone, who's a good friend of the Center for Migration Studies. She's also a professor of law at Villanova and founder and faculty director for the Strategic Initiative for Migrants and Refugees at the university, and founder of the law school's in-house clinical program. And she's a founder of another program, which she's going to talk about today. Michele, welcome.
So yeah, I'm Michele Pistone from Villanova University, and I'm actually now the founder of the new Mother Cabrini Institute on Immigration. Yeah, the university announced it a few weeks ago. You might know that Villanova is located outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in a town called Villanova. And very close by, Cabrini University was one of our neighbors. And they closed a few years ago, and Villanova took over the property of Cabrini University. And Mother Cabrini, of course, being the patron saint for migrants, she actually came to New York at the request of Pope Leo XIII to serve Italian immigrants. My family's Italian and we settled in New York, so it feels really appropriate for me to be running this new institute in the name of Mother Cabrini. And I always think, what would Mother Cabrini do? And I feel like today, this conference and this time really calls us all to pull out our internal Mother Cabrini and be the warrior and hopeful advocate for immigrants and refugees. So there are so many themes from Bishop Seitz' remarks that I want to call upon and talk about a little. One is, of course, who are we? And what are we building next? I feel as an academic, so much of what I do is about thinking about the future. And what can I do with students now so that we have a different future? And as Kevin said, I started the clinical program at Villanova's Law School 26 years ago. And for many years, I ran a clinic in the law school where my students and I provided legal representation to asylum seekers. And it was always so frustrating to walk into the courtroom because most of the people there didn't have an attorney. They didn't have anyone helping them, representing them. And so much of a case relies on whether someone has an advocate as opposed to those who don't. So after having done that for many years, I decided that I needed to think about a new model. And I took everything that I had done in my law school program, and I created an online program to train advocates for immigrants. And Clinic, Anna's in the room as well. Clinic has been doing this for decades. There are regulations on the books that allow for non-lawyers to become accredited representatives. They're accredited by the Department of Justice, and they can provide legal services to immigrants. So I created an online certificate program to train immigrant advocates to become accredited representatives. And to also train people in accompaniment. And when we think about who we are, one thing that I realized from that program is that there are so many people who are in the pews, people who are called by their faith to become part of the solution. And what I realized, I knew that there was a need when I created VISTA. It's called the Villanova Interdisciplinary Immigration Studies Training for Advocates, VISTA. And when I created VISTA, of course, I knew that there was a need on the side of like people who needed legal representation, people who needed accompaniment. But what I didn't realize is about who we are. Because there were people who came from all walks of life who decided to become advocates for immigrants. And they all said that they'd been hoping to do this, that they had been trying to find a way to serve their community. And VISTA provided them that opportunity. And that's what I think we are. We are people who want to become part of the solution, who want to be guided, who want to collaborate, who want to be in this room and see and create a different future. So that what we're going to build is very different than where we are today. And so the students in VISTA range in age from 18, my oldest student was 86 years old. They come, it's an online program, so they come from all 50 states. There are people who are thinking that they want to go to law school, and this is like a stepping stone toward that. There's a lot of people who always thought they wanted to become a lawyer, but they couldn't afford to go to law school, or law school would price them out of the market for providing services to poor people. We also have like former bankers. The mayor from Scarsdale, New York, the former mayor from Scarsdale was a student in this program. Deborah, who's sitting in the front row, is one of my students in VISTA. And so one message here is who we are and what we could be doing next. Let's train ourselves to become advocates for immigrants and to help to accompany immigrants, because we know, as Bishop Seitz says, that our institutions need support. Legal systems are being crushed because there's no one there witnessing what's happening in immigration court. By training people to become advocates, by giving them the skills to go into court, to observe what's happening, we're educating ourselves and we're preparing ourselves for the future. And it's just so heartwarming to be involved in this kind of program, because I see the energy and the excitement out there. People want to be different. They want to become part of the solution. We just have to give them the way. The other thing that Bishop Seitz talked about, which I want to emphasize, is our need to collaborate. Migration is such a complicated issue, and it is much more than anything that anyone can really do on their own. And we're at this point in time where we really need to be thinking new about how to collaborate. And so I feel so grateful to be part of this community where we're kind of recognizing that collaboration is important and that we need new models. So let's think big and build that muscle of hope so that we can be the hope for immigrants and refugees into the future.
Thank you, Michele. I'm just going to share a few comments on refugees. I know we're running a bit behind, so I'll be quick, but I worked on it, so I'm going to do it anyway. Just a few facts, and hold on to your chairs. There are a record 125 million persons who have been displaced globally. That's a record. Displacement has doubled over the past decade. All right. UNHCR estimated that the demand for resettlement slots this year is 25% higher than last year. At the same time, the US has shut down its US refugee program after having resettled 100,000 refugees last year. This year, we've resettled a couple of hundred Afrikaners. The number of refugees in the world has increased by 10% over the past 2 years, driven by conflicts in Sudan, the Congo, Myanmar, Ukraine, and Yemen, among others, from 35 to 36 million to 43 million refugees. At the same time, the US has ended overseas assistance for refugees, funding which helps stabilize refugee communities and help them return to their homelands when it is safe. There is currently over 3.6 million cases pending in our asylum system. The number of new asylum cases has dropped by almost 90% in the last 6 months, due mainly to the denial of asylum at the southern border. And now the administration is planning for next week at the General Assembly to push an agenda that would restrict global asylum rights. This is not to depress you, but to sort of throw some reality of what we're facing. The US refugee and asylum protection regime is at risk. And we have to work to maintain it and to preserve it and to restore it at the appropriate time. But how do we do that? Three suggestions. First, we have to maintain our standards. We can't meet them where they are. We have to say, this is what needs to be done. We need to restore the US refugee program at this healthy level. Refugee Council USA recently sent a letter to the Hill asking for 125,000 to be resettled next year. Now, we know that the administration's not going to do that. But if we were to meet them at a lower number, then Democrats and even some Republicans may give pause. Well, maybe we don't have to resettle as many refugees as we used to. So we can't go back. We don't want to meet them on their ground. We want to say what is needed, what the need is globally, and what the humanitarian suffering is happening. Second, we need to take this time to come to a consensus as how to reform the asylum system in this country. We have a severe backlog. The system is broken. But if we don't come up with an alternative that works, consistent with Bishop Seitz' theme, it could be eliminated altogether. And again, we cannot retreat from our standards. We need another system that makes it more efficient, more timely, without sacrificing the due process rights of all asylum seekers. And finally, this is most important, the church must not abandon our historical role as supporter and resettler of refugees. It's unfortunate and almost tragic that the church, once the largest resettlement organization in the US and the world, is, because of current circumstances, no longer resettling refugees. We need to have a discussion about where we want our program to be. We need to prepare for the time where we can re-engage with the government and partner with the government and again become the biggest resettlement agency in the world. Where that will be needs to be determined, whether it goes back to USCCB, another Catholic agency, or has been recommended in the past, an independent agency focused solely on migration and refugees. This discussion needs to start now, and we need to prepare for the future when we have the opportunity to re-engage on this important work. So with that, I'll open the panel to questions. I think we have about 5 or 10 minutes so we can take questions. There's a roving microphone, I think. So if you want to ask a question, either to comment on Bishop Seitz's talk or anything of the panelists, please raise your hand and please identify yourself.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry.
I'm Deandra Garcia with the Sisters of Charity of New York, Advocacy and Program Coordinator. Thank you all for speaking. Quick question for Father Brian Strassburger. What is the name of your podcast, please?
Great. Thank you for giving me that plug. It's the Jesuit Border Podcast. We just went with all the easiest words to search for. So anywhere you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple, or otherwise. And we have at least 2 people that we've interviewed on the podcast in the room, Bishop Seitz, Christine Meyer from St. Ignatius Parish. There might be more that I'm missing, but we're about to launch season 8 in a couple of weeks. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I am Christopher Benitez Cuertas here with the Department of Sociology, Anthropology, and Criminal Justice at Seton Hall University. And this is more based on Bishop Seitz's keynote, but also a bit on the comments just made by Mr. Appleby. What is the is there a sort of fear regarding the political positioning of individual Catholics? I, for one, have grown up in an environment that MAGA Catholics were a thing. Is there a way to appeal to individual members of the church who might otherwise be on board with many of the public policies of the day and kind of depoliticize the situation?
Well, I really think I'll take a shot. We just have to educate. The reality is that 50 to 55% of Catholics voted for this administration. And they might have done that for valid reasons. But there are a lot of Catholics who may disagree with the church's position on immigration for various reasons. And the tack to take is not to treat them as someone who's not a member of our faith or that doesn't have valid reasons to disagree, but to enter into a dialogue if you can. To go speak with those groups, to discuss the issues. And I'm sure Bishop Seitz and other bishops have given talks and have almost had shoes thrown at us. But one time I went into a Knights of Columbus and I was surprised by the reaction. But people have valid concerns, valid fears. You have to address them and discuss them, and also uplift the gospel and the words of Pope Leo as well. Sorry, I keep going, but the one thing that opponents of immigration, especially in the Catholic world, they say it's a prudential judgment, so we can do whatever we want. Well, no, that's not true. If you follow a prudential judgment, you have to you have to be guided by what the church is saying. You can't ignore it altogether. So that's an important point to make as well. But education, I think, needs to continue.
The other thing I would add would be encounter. I think that was so big for Pope Francis. It's about encounter. If I'm getting little rays of hope in an otherwise very bleak future, or stories I've read of a town in Nebraska that all of a sudden a member of their community has been detained and deported, and they're like, no, you're mass deportations. We voted for this. We want all the criminals gone. This was a contributing member of our community and society and ran a bakery and, knows my kids' names and things like that. So I think people are even having the encounter and they don't even realize it. And so some parts of this mass deportation campaign are revealing the encounters that you're already having regularly with immigrants who are foundational members of our community. And so that's that tiny little ray of hope I'm seeing, is that people are already having some of those encounters. But those who haven't, how can we invite that encounter? Because I think that's what breaks down the ideology more than anything. I think that's what the antidote is in my mind.
Hi, I'm Anna. I'm a student here in the MBA program. My question is, do you have any recommendations or suggestions on how we can help Palestinians who are being exiled in masses right now, and many who are being prohibited from entering our country?
I'm not an expert on the Middle East, but the church's position is pretty clear on that there should be a two-state solution. And the Holy Father has spoken out against what's happening in Gaza, for sure. I wrote an article for The Hill advocating that Palestinians be resettled. It fell on deaf ears, of course, because some try to characterize Palestinians as all threats to the society. But especially families and children that are suffering. So, I think from a Catholic perspective, we need to follow what the Holy Father is saying, and call for a two-state solution, and call for the end of what's happening in Gaza. And I think that's the church's position.
My name is Janet Paste. I am involved with the Migrant Ministry Initiative at St. Francis Xavier in Manhattan. My question is, anecdotally, we are seeing the power of clerics and religious going to courtrooms. Brian wrote a piece about it for America Magazine. And it strikes me that that is a ripe and rich area for advocacy in many different ways. How do we go about engaging our pastors, our cardinals, our archbishops, and on a parish level to actively get involved in that kind of advocacy, to be there for our migrant neighbors?
Yeah, thanks, Janet. That's a great question. I think there are people trying to animate that. I mean, I think there's some signs of life. I mean, San Diego is a great example of it. Bishop Pham there has been he himself went and presented in migrant court, and now they've created the Faith Initiative that's mobilizing both the laity and clerics to be able to participate, and women religious to be able to participate and witness in immigration court, and for people to call up if they've got some court hearing and they just don't want to go alone, to have someone go with them. So that's a couple examples. Nick Napolitano's in the back of the room. He works for the Society of Jesus, the province here on the East Coast, and they're organizing a call for Jesuits around the country to come and hear about court immigration accompaniment and get some basic skill sets. So those are just a couple of signs of life of this is kind of happening. But I would invite and encourage everyone to I mean, we've got clerics in the room, take initiative on this, take leadership in your own diocese. We've got a couple of there's one day of immigration court in our area, and so it's a day that I'm in Mexico, but these Franciscan Capuchins showed up right after I had gone and witnessed an immigration court, and they're like, we're here to do migrant accompaniment. I was like, you guys want to go to court every Tuesday? And they've been going. So we got two Franciscan Capuchins in full habit showing up at the courtroom every Tuesday in Brownsville. So the little things are happening, and I would encourage anyone involved in diocesan staff, parish, priests who are here, bishops, of course, who are in the room as well. It's certainly a way that we can step up and be a public witness. Women religious who are in the room too. I don't want to ignore that. They've been powerful witnesses. Sister Rose was with me, and I was sitting there just kind of filming it, and Sister Rose went right up to the ICE officials. Like, where are you taking him? It's like, I don't know if I had the courage to kind of say that to this armed masked man, but Sister Rose was relentless. And so yeah, I mean, just to elevate those voices that this is happening, and we need to find ways to continue to do that. I think it's a great question, and I think it's a great thing that we could be on the forefront of. So those are a couple of ways that it's already happening, and I invite anyone else here to be part of that. Thanks.
And I would just add that it's not limited to people religious, right? Like everybody in the room, everybody in our community can go into court and play that role. And so for us to be thinking of ourselves in that way, to be able to accompany and be witnesses in this system that's breaking down around us.
All right. Thank you to the panel for your talk.